This episode of Gators Breakdown is brought to you by UFM Underwear. Head to ufmunderwear.com and use promo code BREAKDOWN for $5 off your purchase. UFM Underwear. Support your manhood. The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SCC. And joining me this episode to review the 38-0 win over Towson for the Gators is Will Sammon from The Athletic. Will was a sluggish performance in some areas, but the Gators still showed enough to beat an opponent that they should, shut them out, and look like how you're supposed to look for a good part of the game, but most importantly, not get any more players injured.
Yeah, precisely. Give Florida some credit there. They are exactly where they're supposed to be at this point at 5-0. 2 shutout wins over the 2 FCS opponents on their schedule. So they handled their business. So I think there's something to be said about that. And so although it may not have been as crisp as a lot of people would have wished for, particularly Florida fans, and particularly with the defense in the first half, look, they didn't give up any points. And again, they accomplished exactly what they were supposed to accomplish to this point in the season before the most arduous part of the schedule appears.
Right then. Well, I guess, I had to stay behind this week. I had a little minor skin procedure on Friday, so I couldn't make it down to Gainesville. Of course, you can tell from the camera shots that the crowd was a late arriving crowd. It also was nowhere near full capacity for the Swamp. Probably the players were kind of the same way, sleepwalking through, I think, a lot of it, but still, and we'll get into it, but still a lot of the same issues crept up in this game versus Towson, and some of the issues you didn't necessarily really expect.
You doing okay, man? I didn't know you had to go to the.
Yeah. Just it is minor, but wasn't supposed to get all hot and sweaty for that, so I kind of had to stay behind this time.
Don't blame you, especially when you have to deal with something like that. But yeah, I mean, I thought it was interesting that Jonathan Gurnard actually mentioned the fact that the defense had a tendency so far this year to play down to opponents. And I thought that was pretty refreshing to hear because it was pretty clear that was the case early in games. And so when you know that you're that much better, look, you want them to play a perfect game and a crisp game and all that, but I think it's only human nature to kind of play that way to some extent. And again, I mean, they gave up 0 points. So they accomplished what they were supposed to accomplish. They did turn it around, and I don't think that they're going to have that issue going forward because they don't have the opportunity to play down to their opponents anymore. Because you're going against an Auburn team that's at least top 10, if not top 5 at this point after their performance against Mississippi State last night. And then it doesn't get a whole lot easier after that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll get into Kyle Trask, Emory Jones' performance, the struggles of the offensive line and run game once again, and the defense. But before we do, remember you can find Gators Breakdown on news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. Also find the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube, like so many of you are doing now, watching us live on YouTube. So thank you so much for that. When using those services, please share, rate, and review the show. And on social media, follow Gators Breakdown on Twitter and Facebook at Gators Breakdown. Will, so yeah, we'll move on. And the offense, pretty much a story we're used to by now, and it's the passing game carrying the offense without much help from the run game. Kyle Trask only completed his first 15 passes, Will. I mean, only his first 15. No big deal there. Pretty big accomplishment there as Kyle Trask breaks a school record for consecutive completions as he completed 18 in a row. The first 15 versus Towson and the last 3 last week against Tennessee. Completed his first 15 passes for 163 yards and a touchdown. At halftime, Trask was 13 of 13 for 139 yards and a touchdown, plus a rushing touchdown there. 7 of 7 for 64 yards and a touchdown on the game's opening drive, getting the team up early again. And, well, that was a huge issue last year that something the Gators kind of have figured out so far this year. They scored first drive against Miami, the last 2 games as well. So it's an issue that was pretty apparent last year that they've cleaned up this time again, 2 weeks in a row. Trask's first touchdown goes to Kyle Pitts. So since taking over in the fourth quarter at Kentucky, Trask is 47 of 61. That's 77% for 607 yards and 4 touchdowns, along with 2 rushing touchdowns. Well, once again, I know it was Towson. I know it was the opponent, but it really speaks to Trask and Mullen for having a backup that is this capable. And we'll get into it a bit later, but he's doing this without the benefit of a run game.
There's a lot there that you said, but yeah, I think at the start of it, Kyle Trask, right? He sets the record, racks up a ton of completions in a row, like you said. There was some soft coverage there. Let's be real. The corners were way off. It allowed you that sort of underneath to be pretty much wide open for you for the taking. And to their credit, they took advantage of that as they should have, and they executed the way that they should have. So there's a certain degree of credit to be deserved there, and rightfully so. They got the job done, and they continue to do so. Like you said, he's upward of close to about 80% on the season as far as completion rate goes. It's pretty good, right? So there's that. He's an accurate guy. He's pretty smart with the football. He's as competent as it gets as a backup quarterback for this team, and so they're very fortunate to have him in the role that they have him right now, to be able to roll him out there at this point. And we saw them really execute their game plan again. And you mentioned the fact that the first halves of games, or the first drives, particularly the last 2 weeks, they've been good. They've been efficient. They've scored, looked good doing so, and that's despite a lack of a running game. Because over the course of the season so far, Florida has only averaged about 3 yards a carry in first halves. That's the worst in the SEC. That's about 120 or so, 115, something like that in the country, just barely edging Central Michigan, by the way. So it's not good. And for them to still be efficient just underscores the idea of how talented that wide receiver room is, and Kyle Pitts for that matter, where you could have that as sort of a detriment, that running game, but they're able to overcome that because of just how easy those wide receivers make it, because they're just so good, so talented, so good at getting open, so experienced. And so I look at that as something that, yeah, it's certainly not ideal to have that running game experience, the kind of issues that they're experiencing at this point, but still, it's something that I feel like can still play even against better teams, just because of what you have at that receiver room.
Absolutely, and if we have to nitpick here for Kyle Trask's performance, and we can see the pocket awareness, not necessarily where it should be right now, and part of that comes with experience. He hasn't been out there a lot, hasn't had a lot of game experience, starting experience for one thing, but also just not a lot of pure game experience, mainly because of injuries, and not even really being able to play because of cupcake games or blowouts. Is because he's been injured and not being able to take part in some of those games as well. So I think the pocket awareness there comes from being able to play more, but it's going to get ramped up, of course, coming up this week. He won't be able to hang on to the ball. Like, it looks like I won't necessarily say likes to hang on to the ball, but not necessarily taking risk and throwing the ball down the field and necessarily and wants to hold on to the ball. And problem with that, Will, is, and when we've seen it, there seems to be a chance for some turnovers when Kyle Trask is hit. Fumbles the ball when hit. We saw it in the one play where Chris Bleish gets, olays the defensive lineman. Trask gets hit, and the ball flutters in the air. And luckily, Bleish is the one who comes up with it. But it's still, 2 weeks in a row now where we've seen Kyle Trask get hit and a turnover happens.
Yeah, I'm just not sure if he's seeking the pressure as quickly as maybe he should, or as quickly as Dan Mullen wants him to, and being able to pick it up and then make a decision, because that's the real thing with him. And that's what I thought when he first took over as the quarterback, because like you were saying, it's one thing to get the reps in practice and during garbage time, but you're not getting a live rush. You're not getting pressure like that in those situations. And so that's the thing where the game experience, the in-game experience, really comes into play, where you're just not used to it. And so I kind of expected to see a couple more sacks and that sort of thing when you take away Felipe Franks and you insert Kyle Trask. And not just because Felipe Franks was pretty solid at eluding defenders and sort of getting away from that rush at times, but just because it's not easy. I mean, it's not easy to pick that up, especially when it's coming from your blind side, like it has a couple of times for Kyle Trask.
Absolutely, Will. So the hope, of course, was we'd see this run game come in and assert itself and maybe give a glimmer of hope of some progression. It was against an opponent where Florida has a big talent gap. It should be an opportunity for the offensive line just to get something going. But Will, was kind of the same old as far as this season goes. No matter the opponent, this offensive line hasn't been focused. They've messed up assignments. And the most worrisome is, they're just getting beat at times, no matter who the opponent is. And Mullen let it be known after the game as well. Will, he was not happy with the performance there. And quote, "I challenged them. This has got to improve. That has got to improve for us. The mental toughness of the offensive line and their preparation has got to improve as we move forward. Those guys have got to. I know John Hevesy gets on them. They're young guys." And quote from a player, "Hey, no, coach, I'm working." And Mullen kind of quickly, "No, you're not. You're obviously not, because if you were working, we wouldn't have missed assignments. So whatever you're doing is not enough." And he goes on to say they need to do more. NCAA rules, we're not going to have them here all the time. So if you want to keep doing the same thing over and over again and you're not going to improve, what are you doing at night? Everyone learns differently. Tell me, what are you walking through at your dorm, at your apartment? Are you drawing it? Are you watching extra film? Everybody learns in a different way, and guys have to learn what's the best way they can learn, what's the best way they can process information to get going, and then they've got to go do it. And if they don't, then we're not going to get better, and we've got to find someone else that can do it. End the quote. So I'm not sure, Mullen's only been here for 2 years, of course, or a season and a half. I'm not sure if I've ever really heard him call out a position group, much like he did this offensive line here. He was straightforward, straight to the point. Most of it, Will, from reading the quotes, it does seem like it's more of a mental aspect of it and what they're doing, outside of practice. As he said, what are you drawing up? What are you looking at? What are you going through mentally? What processes are you going through to get better? And it's been a mix. You and I talked right before we come on here. It's been a mix mostly of, as I mentioned, going into this, being beat mentally, not being ready mentally, getting beat physically at times. But going back into the first 4 games, it did seem it was more mental mistakes than anything. If they would get to the second level, they didn't hold their block long enough. It wasn't. That's not being physical at all. That was just, okay, I'm just going to tap this guy and he'll move out of the way. It's a physical. The mental part of that is wanting to be physical, but it's not because the offensive lineman got beat physically. So there are a lot of things here to point to with this offensive line. It is affecting the offense more so, the running backs than the passing game. But we all know it's symbiotic, and with this schedule coming up, Florida is going to have to find ways to get this offensive line to grow and progress while the competition ramps up.
I need you to give me your best Dan Mullen impersonation next time you read a quote like that, David. I could probably give you one next time if you want one. But I thought it was right on, though. I thought the message was right on. I thought it was needed. Like you said, throughout the course of his 2 seasons so far, Dan Mullen has not really done that, and I don't think he's really needed to either, for the most part. I mean, we're talking about a team that's won the majority of their games, and to be real, that Missouri game last year was probably the only opportunity he really had to do something like that. And he did, for the most part. He did kind of call his team out, say that they need to care a lot more, have a lot more pride, be more competitive, that sort of thing. And that was a memorable speech post game for him. And so I thought he made the right move here. And honestly, it really wasn't that surprising, because even if you go back to the spring, he said that we're in the market for a graduate transfer. I mean, he made that very, very clear. He was candid and very clear with that. And so I wasn't very surprised to hear him be completely honest after that performance, because one, it's pretty obvious that the offensive line has struggled, and two, there's no more room to work out the kinks. I mean, that was it. That was your last opportunity to do so in a game setting before the schedule starts to really, really matter. And so it was the right timing, and it was the right message from Dan Mullen. Can it change? That's the question. Can they improve? Can they get better? I'm not sure. I mean, he talked about having the idea of, okay, if this guy's not going to do the right thing, or if he's not going to improve, if he's not going to get better, if he's not going to put in the work to get better, whatever it is, we're going to make a change. Well, the problem with that is, who are you going to change that guy with? Because you already implemented or inserted Richard Garage into the mix, but that doesn't really solve the issue because there wasn't just one position where you weren't getting production out of consistently. Multiple positions, at least two. So who is that next guy if you need another guy? They don't really have one, not an experienced one anyway. The guy that John Hevesy mentioned the other day last week was Ethan White. Reminder, Ethan White's a true freshman. So you're relying on that's your seventh guy essentially, according to John Hevesy. So I don't know about that. So it's kind of like they are the group that we knew that they were, even as back as the spring. The issue is that we haven't seen the improvement. And right now, you'd be hard pressed to say that they're going to all of a sudden improve when they're going against the best defensive front they've seen all season on Saturday.
Yeah, I think one place they may can improve. What we'll have to see is just pure intensity, just because of these big games. But
Sure, yeah, I got that.
Right, but does that really fix any of the issues? Because of course, these teams are better as well. So it's a catch-22 there of whether you think they can get better just because of pure intensity and pure want to. Because even though the intensity isn't there versus Towson, you should still be able to do what you want to do in a lot of those spots. It is affecting the run game. The question is now: does Damian Pierce earn more carries after his performance versus Towson? 6 attempts, 84 yards, a big 37-yard run. Michael P. Ryan couldn't really get anything going again. Malik Davis didn't get on the field until Emory Jones took over at quarterback in the fourth quarter. I have to think his fumbling issues are the cause there. Something that may help the run game is the insertion of Richard Garage, as you mentioned. We'll kind of see it's showing up that the left side just a bit when they can move Heggie to right side. And put him at right guard in place of Chris Bleish. Right side of the line, clearly the weak point here, but Bleish did not have the best of games once again. 1 point in the second drive on back-to-back plays. He's beat where P. Ryan is tackled for a 1-yard loss. Then the very next play gets beat badly in pass protection, and Trask is hit and fumbles, as we alluded to earlier. So I'm definitely not saying, inserting Garage is the answer to fix the offensive line, but we're at the point now where maybe you have to try something different. Maybe it just clicks a little more, but it will, for the most part, we're 5 games into the season now. You can kind of tell they are just what they are.
I agree. And I like Chris Bleich a lot. I think he has a lot of potential. I think he's going to be a pretty good offensive lineman in the SEC, actually. It's just they can't afford to have him go through the growing pains that he's going through in order and expect to win games against their next slew of quality opponents here. And so I think that if Richard Garage is playing better, then I think that he deserves more playing time. And let's be honest, though. I mean, it didn't completely make everything so much better, though. It was better, but it didn't completely eliminate all their issues. There were still a couple of runs that went for negative plays. One in particular came to mind where it was actually a Pierce run. So it's not as if that his insertion is also going to all of a sudden make things so much better. It was a Pierce run where he was brought down for a loss of 2 yards after the offensive line got beat by Towson on the play. So yeah, I mean, I just don't see it really changing a whole lot regardless, because again, you're going with an inexperienced group as far as game action still. And it's just you needed to see them get better over the last couple of weeks, and we haven't seen that. That's really the kicker for me, is that you had the opportunity to make some progress, to feel a lot better about yourselves after the last 2 games, or even the last 3 or 4 games, honestly, because you had the opportunities to go against a couple of SEC teams there, plus a couple of cupcake opponents, and we're 5 weeks in, and Dan Mullen is calling out the offensive line. So that kind of tells you all you need to know.
Right. Some receiving notes for the game. Kyle Pitts, 4 receptions for the 3rd consecutive game, this time for 28 yards and 2 touchdowns. Once Emory Jones comes in, another tight end, Keon Zipper, true freshman there, catches tunnel screen touchdown. So the tight end position making some plays, Will, against Towson. Grimes led the way with 5 catches for the receivers. And they just keep doing what they do. But one wrinkle that caught my eye was in goal line situations, maybe to help this run game just a little bit. Josh Hammond getting carries, motioning in from the backfield. Nice little wrinkle. Maybe surprised that it came out versus Towson, but maybe you put it on tape for something for Auburn, LSU, South Carolina, Georgia to prepare for. We've seen the sweep that he took, of course, against Kentucky for the long run and the touchdown. You don't have Kadarius Toney out there, who would mainly be the guy in that scenario. But Josh Hammond showing his versatility out there.
Definitely. He's the only guy they could use for that play, of course. And Copeland could do that play, that play as well. So you're kind of showing it. I mean, like, they're not stupid here. The offensive line has not gotten a good push, so they're not going to go with QB power in those situations or something like or zone read, or it's just not going to be the same thing that you saw last year. They're going to have to get creative. Everybody knows that. So I didn't really have an issue with like showing it or whatever the case is, because people know it. So you might as well practice it and get it in there. And maybe you use it, maybe you don't. But Auburn before that game knew that was a possibility anyway. So it's not as if like you're showing that back in their mind. Some of that is there, sure. Yeah, they're going to get creative. Everybody knows that, and I think it could work to some extent. They do have the playmakers, like I said. It's not just Hammond. They have two or three at least other guys who could run that sort of thing. Even Van Jefferson got into the mix a little bit on that earlier run as well. So I mean, they have the options, and like I've said before, what gives Florida a fighting chance, or I want to go even as far as say a decent chance, is their coaching staff scheme against a weakness or a flaw as good or better than anybody else that I'm aware of. It's really a strong suit. It gives them a I don't want to take advantage. Again, it gives them that hope that they can make it happen in the game. And it could be similar to maybe even like last year against Mississippi State, where they were still working out a lot of kinks for their offensive line at that time. I think it was a late September game, and that defensive front featured 2 first-round draft picks in Montez Sweat and Jefferson, and it was a ferocious defensive front seven. They really got after it, and lo and behold, Florida was still able to win that game, even despite not really having that great of a rushing attack, because they really found a lot of success with the short passing game with screens, swing passes, that sort of thing. So it kind of depends on what kind of look they're getting from the defense. But their ability to scheme around flaws is something that Florida's staff has, and it's something that people really hope for to kind of give Florida a sense that they can win this game.
All right, we'll move to the defense here and look at their performance here versus Towson. But before we do, guys, you've got to try UFM underwear. It's hot out there, still hot out there as October approaches. So whether you're out there tailgating or working, you need a pair of UFM underwear. Underwear for Men is the only brand of men's underwear that offers both isolation and support, all while keeping you cool. Unlike other pouch underwear brands that have thin mesh panels or pre-sized pouches, Underwear for Men's patented pending design prevents skin-on-skin contact and eliminates chafing. Underwear for Men is a state of Florida company and has you covered no matter the activity. Everyday underwear, athletic underwear, work underwear, or medical underwear. Underwear for Men is made for it all. Try your pair now. Head over to ufmunderwear.com and use promo code BREAKDOWN to get $5 off your pair of UFM underwear. UFM underwear, support your manhood. And here we go on the defensive side of the ball. Will, the defense, while pitching a shutout, didn't necessarily put together a great performance. Third down conversions were an issue in the first half when Towson converted 5 of 8. Defense did rebound to hold Towson to 3 of 7 on third down in the second half. Florida's opponents have only converted 10 of 37. That's 27% third or fourth downs in the second half this season, compared to converting 18 of 38 at 47.4% in the first half. Tommy Flacco, of course, using his legs to escape the pocket, keep plays alive, some design runs as well. And what should, be a little bit of help for Florida in prep for Bo Nix from Auburn and what he was showing as well. Another, mobile quarterback here, not necessarily, a bruiser type of runner, but can still make some things happen in breakdown plays and design runs there. But Will, plus we also saw issues tackling once again. Maybe we can kind of chalk that up to intensity, kind of like with this offensive line. Hopefully, it's an issue. Yeah, it got better after the Miami game. Still has been a minor issue as we moved through the season, but really showed up big against Towson again. Is there issues we've seen at times this season, but the defense showing that that bend don't break mentality versus Towson.
Yeah, as a college football fan, I was kind of entertained by a lot of things that Towson was doing. I mean, their offense looked kind of entertaining and fun, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
So, I mean, and Flacco did a pretty good job with his eyes and with his pump fakes and all that. So, I do give Towson some credit. I mean, they came in looking to run their offense, and I mean, Flacco looked like a pretty competent QB there, especially for that level that they play on. So, good sort of scheme and plan for them. But yeah, I mean the offense, the defensive tackling was an issue there, and like you said, I think some of it could be chalked up to intensity or lack thereof. That should be shored up going forward, because it was an issue in the week 0 game against Miami, but we did see them clean it up afterward. And then when they have a bunch of guys missing again, plus it's an inferior opponent, I don't know. I kind of give them the benefit of the doubt that they're going to kind of switch things up. I mean, sure things up again, especially against a quality opponent in Auburn. So I'm not really that concerned. I think when you look at the sort of amount of concerns on Florida's list, yeah, it's there, but I don't know. I feel like the containment of the quarterback is probably a bigger deal because that's something that they had a little bit of trouble with last year as well, particularly against Kentucky. May have happened again, but I'm not remembering. But it's not an easy thing, though, at the same time. I mean, we see a bunch of teams across the country just have trouble with these dual threat QBs who could make things happen on the ground as well. It's just not an easy thing. That's why these guys have some success. So that's more of an issue for me, particularly when you're talking about Bo Nix and Auburn, because he did some of those things against Mississippi State, and it was a difference for them, I felt like. And so you look at them being healthy, though, with Florida, maybe Jabari Zuniga helps on that edge, so that's not as big of an issue. Because I think you were asking a lot of a guy like Jeremiah Moon and some other guys to kind of do that consistently over the course of an entire game, or at least during the meaningful periods of the game. And so when you have that depth and you could lean on some other guys for that, in theory, it should help a lot. So I'm not really overly concerned about the defense. I think they're going to be fine. And I just, yeah, I look at the missed tackles, and I understand that it can be frustrating for Florida fans. But again, I just think that once they get guys healthy, I mean, they were playing without Henderson, Zuniga, Ventrell Miller, Sean Davis. I mean, you're talking about some of their best tacklers there, and those guys were missing from the game, and they are all expected to play Saturday against Auburn.
Yeah, QB contain. Going back to that, I do think once you get the pairing of Grenard and Zuniga back, that helps there. There were times we saw Moon spying a Flacco there. I think maybe in the future, if Florida's going to use a spy for quarterbacks, maybe Bernie probably the best option there in what he can do. Good for him leading the team in tackles yesterday, of course, as well. But all in all, Will, the defense did get a shutout, only gave up 248 yards. Big factor creating 4 turnovers. Florida entered Saturday as one of 17 FBS teams with multiple interceptions in multiple games this season, and it recorded its 3rd such game versus Towson. Gators had just 2 takeaways in the first 2 games, but they have 11 in the last 3 games. Florida entered the Towson game with a 3-way tie for the FBS lead with 20 sacks. Will, 4 more. So 24 for the Gators. Kind of ridiculous stat right there. 24 sacks for the season. And then, hey, Brad Stewart and Mahmoud Diabate recorded their first career sacks in those 4 there. So I'm like you. The defense, I'm still, even with those issues that crept up against Towson, that's still not too big of a worry for me, mainly because of some guys who were missing. I do think the intensity gets ramped up there. And, the transitive property can get you in trouble a lot in sports because, just because Florida had a little bit of struggle versus Towson and Auburn, just puts it on Mississippi State. It's, that doesn't mean you're going to get the same 2 teams next week. Last year, for a good example, Florida beating LSU. LSU goes into next week, trounces Georgia. Nobody saw that coming. So you're going to get a different team every week. And I think, I think for the offense, the offensive line, I think the issue there, it is more of an issue that I think we know is probably going to stay as the season goes along. But as far as the defense there, I still can't help. And maybe it's some orange and blue glasses a little bit, but I still can't help that these guys will be fine in the long run.
Yeah, I agree with you. But I understand the other side of it because I mean Towson, those turnovers were very timely. Let's put it that
Yeah.
way. For Florida last night, and what we were talking about a couple of weeks ago, maybe even if I think it was maybe 2 weeks ago, we were talking about turnovers and the lack of it for Florida's defense, and I was like, well, some of that's luck when it comes to turnovers. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is. Tip passes. Bounce ball on a fumble going your way, and you recover it, that sort of thing. It's going to happen. But it's how many times you put yourself in the position for that to be in your favor. That I think is some level of skill there. And so we have seen Florida clamp down defensively, again, show up when it matters and get the job done. But yeah, the turnovers were very, very helpful. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah. Well, do you think the defensive rotation is pretty much where it's at now? Do you think they keep Bernie at linebacker, or maybe move him out to star, maybe move Trey Dean around a little bit? I mean, we know these guys are versatile anyway, and when they were signed and brought into Florida, we knew Bernie could play safety or linebacker or star. Maybe to get the best guys on the field, because we've been impressed with what Ventrell Miller's done so far. He's missed some games too, but to get him and Bernie on the field at the same time, and maybe in pairing with Dean as well, do you move maybe Bernie to star, to bring in Miller and let him play beside David Reese, and move Bernie back to maybe a safety, just to get your best guys on the field?
Sometimes I think you do, but it depends clearly on the situation that you're facing at a given time. So I think yeah, that's a possibility. But so for example, like third down, right? On a third down, passing down, I expect Bernie to be on the field. I expect him to be covering somebody and making sure that guy stops before the first down marker, because he's really good at that. That's one of the main reasons why he's playing that linebacker position. So that's the sort of thing that I would. So it's like. And could Ventrell be on the field as well at that same time? Sure, because he's been really adept at blitzing and getting to the quarterback very quickly when he's been on the field and when he's been asked to do that. So I don't know. It just really depends on what the intent is, because Todd Grantham has the pieces that he could play with, and so I expect to see a bunch of different variations over the course of the next couple of games, depending on what the situation is particularly calling for, and that's where you can really mix and match things and take advantage of that versatility that a lot of these guys have, for that matter, because we've seen even like Jabari Zuniga, Jeremiah Moon, and Jonathan Grenard really play a lot of percent of the snaps on the field at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that we could also see against Auburn, and even going forward after that too. So there's a lot of mixing and matching that can be done. I thought last night was not the best game for Trey Dean, but the coaching staff remains pretty high on that guy. They have a firm belief that he can get the job done. They like the experience that he had last year. They won a lot of games with him on the field, so they feel confident in him. And I think that yesterday may have been not the best game for him, but again, it was one game, and I feel like his skill set does play pretty well for that nickel position still. I didn't think it would be that as much of a drop off as it sometimes appears to be between him and Chauncey Gardner, but again, it's a new position for him, so I think it's going to take a little bit of time, or it's taking a little bit of time just because of that, because I feel like the skill set is there for him.
And not to be overlooked, Will, the Florida special teams blocked its first field goal since September 1st, 2018. That was the opener last year against Charleston Southern. That was the last time Florida blocked a field goal attempt, and that was the final play of the first half there. And also not to be overlooked, of course, Evan McPherson, 42-yard field goal. He's made 23 of his 26 career field goal attempts. That's 88% there. So always can be counted on Evan McPherson there. So when it's all said and done, Will, the Gators have won 9 consecutive games for the first time since the school record 22-game winning streak that spanned the final 10 games of 2008 and the first 12 games of 2009. Florida's winning streak is also the longest active streak in the SEC and is tied with App State for the third longest active FBS streak. That's behind Clemson with 18 and Ohio State with 10. The Gators have outscored their opponents 91-3 over the last 9 quarters, and they're outscoring opponents 105-17 in the second half of the season. With a schedule probably hasn't looked as tough as what we thought it did coming into the season. Miami's not as good as we thought. Even after the game, we thought Miami could be a top 25 team when that game was played, but they're still not doing so well in the ACC. As I said, last week barely escaped Central Michigan and Jim McElwain last week. Kentucky has just fallen off since they played valiantly versus Florida. Sawyer Smith there as well. He got injured last week versus Mississippi State. Mississippi State romped them. South Carolina put it to them yesterday as well. So, Kentucky win, not looking as good as it did. Tennessee's Tennessee. So with this big stretch coming up, Florida's been tested, but maybe by not some of the best opponents out there.
No, I mean, look, they're where they're supposed to be at this point.
Yep.
And it's easy to kind of look at Miami and Kentucky and say, wow, they stink. But at the time, those were pretty good opponents. I mean, like, we look at that as pretty good tests and matchups. So you can't really take a whole lot. Like, you can't just all of a sudden say, okay, well, those games don't matter. Or those were still tough wins to come back for Florida. And they showed a lot of character, taking care of their business fairly efficiently. And they've responded well to things. They've come from behind times, so we've seen some good character out of this team. They play with a lot of pride on both ends, especially on defense, but really on both sides of the ball. And so there is a lot to see. There's a lot to like there with Florida. The problem is that their warts are pretty obvious for everybody to see. So there's plenty to like with Florida. I mean, Kyle Trask has stepped in, done some good things, has been really good at the quarterback position for them. Defense has racked up a bunch of turnovers and sacks and created a lot of havoc. And the wide receivers are the wide receivers. They're going to make things happen for Florida's offense. But yeah, I mean, part of their wins and part of the long streak is a product of a softer schedule. But I mean, 5-0, you outlined the scoring differential, so it's not as if they're just getting here by the seat of their pants. I mean, they've accomplished what they should have accomplished at this point.
All right, some reaction to some of our listeners here. Ryan at Go Gators for Life says it wasn't very clean, but a win is a win, and we are going to be healthy for Auburn. There wasn't much excitement in the game, which is why we need to stop scheduling these type of games. No one is interested, including the players. Well, that kind of spoke to a lot of what we talked about, the intensity or lack of intensity for these types of games. These games aren't going to go away. I think we will see less of them, but they're not going to go away. Part of it is, it helps fund these programs, these smaller programs, and that's just part of what college football, a necessary evil of college football. If you don't like these cupcake games, I don't necessarily like them, but they are part of college football there, and it does. You can tell in the stands and all that stuff, but still, Florida's making a lot of money yesterday, even though with not a sold out stadium.
Sure, and scheduling has changed, and Florida's way of scheduling games has changed too under Scott Strickland, who has obviously realized that one, you need to get fans interested and into the stadium, and two, it affects subjectively how you are looked at for the college football playoff if you're a premier program. And so, yeah, you got to schedule up and schedule better teams, and they're doing that. They inherited these schedules featuring multiple FCS schools, and they've made it clear that what their goals are of a certain amount of Power 5 opponents, and they're getting to that. I mean, we see that with Utah scheduling, Colorado, Texas, Miami. So it'll be better in time. But yeah, I mean, it's a hard sell for you to travel. And make it to this game, especially, when 90 degree. Actually, the weather was pretty fine yesterday, actually, but still, it's a pretty hard sell for me.
All right, we'll get to a lot of these right now, of course. A lot of these are going to be concerns that the fans are sharing here. Daddy Pop says young guys need to study their assignments more. Still looking for the offensive line to attack with a killer mentality in the run game. Defense needs to get off the field more often on third down. Sean Hankins says, we walked out of the stadium injury-free. The run game is a real concern. Swing passes in the screen game will have to supplement the run game for the rest of the season. I'm feeling less confident going into the gauntlet than I was week one. So there we go. Well, that last part there, a lot of expectations coming into this season. Some things have changed. I looked our episode last week. Will Miles and I, you kind of broke down. It was a different looking 4-0 start than we envisioned coming into the season because of the injuries, because of the offensive line, and it's expectations. I can tell just go looking through Gator Nation tweets and message boards. Expectations have been tempered a bit. Still very excited. Still looking forward to this game versus Auburn, which will tell us a whole lot about this team. I think we know a lot about this team, but I still think I still do think there's an extra step this team can and will take. I still think there may be some creativity out there we haven't seen with the playbook. There's going to have to be to mask this offensive line. You can only mask it so much though when you're in the SEC and the offensive line is your main issue. That's hard to mask. But as you said earlier, this coaching staff is probably one of the best in the nation to be able to do that. We will see some swings. We will see some screens. That's one reason I know we keep looking at Dameon Pierce getting more carries than LaMichael Pirine, but with this offensive line, I still think Pirine has a big part of this offense because of his use out of the backfield as a receiver. They can motion him outside as a receiver. They can line him up as a receiver. And he's a pretty good blocker as well at the running back position, something I think we will definitely need moving forward with the schedule. So while running the ball, yes, we'd like to see Pierce get more carries. I still think in maybe passing situations, LaMichael Pirine still will be the running back we'll see most out there.
Sure, and I think they motioned Pirine out of the backfield, lined him up at wide receiver at least one time that I remember, and really they got a pretty good matchup with it. I think a linebacker went over to cover Pirine, and you would think that would be where they went, but they actually went somewhere else. I think it was actually the Kyle Pitts. Could be off there, but it was to somebody else, and that just goes to show you that there's a little bit of a catch and mouse mind game that you could play when you're doing that, because simple logic is, okay, they're getting the matchup they want, look for the ball to go to Pirine. That wasn't the case. So yeah, I expect that too. The game will confirm one of two things: either their problems are too big to overcome and it's going to hinder them the rest of the season, like some people expect, or that they could coach around it and they could find a way to win and they could persevere through it despite it. One of those two things will happen, of course, and we'll finally be able to see it for ourselves what the case is. But as far as expectations, really, I feel like these as if like this was.
Well, I'll give you. I think your internet's cutting out. I'll give you a second to come back around here. So yeah, I think it's frozen on there. So yeah, I can keep an eye on it and see if your video ends up getting better. I'll read a couple more tweets here while we're at it. Robert Guagliardo says defense was making plays when it needed to in the first half, clamped down in the second with the starters. Trask efficient again. Jones looks good too. Like Mullen opening up the playbook to get run game going. Like for Pierce to see more carries, but overall run game not great. Chad Harrison says, don't miss 3 touchdowns. Dropped the pick 6. Jadon Hill there. Copeland dropped the pass in the end zone. Jefferson overthrown when he was wide open. Offensive line, weak first half. D gave up too many on the ground. So, Will, there's some and I do have you back good. So, some silver lining there as well. If you want to finish your previous point, you can go right ahead as well. But some silver lining here as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was just saying that whatever the expectations, if they've been tempered at all, I feel like they're in line with what they probably should have been at the start of the season, because this isn't a big surprise, the offensive line and the depth of the defense, and that being a little bit questionable in some areas. That also wasn't that much.
All right, well, internet again, so it's fine. I can. I think I got you back. Oh, it's fine. We'll figure this out. I'll finish the episode up with the tweets and what happened around in the SEC and other scores as well there. But yeah, I think the internet's cutting out just a bit. It happened earlier in the episode too, but we'll get by it. Oh, there you are. You're back.
I don't know, man. It's been iffy today. I don't know what the source of the issue is, but the kind of finally, I hope at least cross the T on that point. I just looked at this year as like a 9-3 sort of campaign for Florida, maybe 10-2, and that's kind of like what they're in line to accomplish. On if you're looking at it from like a bright side of it or optimistically. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like the expectations, if they've been brought down a little bit, they're probably in line to what I expected from this team.
Yeah, so yeah, everything's with the 5-0 start. Everything's still there for whatever your expectation was. But as Will said earlier, it's just we'll find out a lot about what this team is made of, and if the coaching staff can mask deficiencies, or if those deficiencies will end up costing some losses here for the Gators. So let's take a look around the SEC. And what happened here? Texas A&M escaped Arkansas 31-27. Pretty ugly game for Texas A&M, and Arkansas really fought hard there that game in the neutral site in Arlington, and had a good chance to beat Texas A&M, but ended up coming up short. Vanderbilt a squeaker 24-18 over Northern Illinois after a slow start. Alabama puts it on Ole Miss 59-31. Smith, the receiver there for Alabama, crazy day. I think 5 touchdowns there receiving there. Towson loses to Florida 38-0, of course. And then game we all had our eyes on, Auburn 56, Mississippi State 23, a game that wasn't close from the get-go. A big statement there about Auburn as they get up early, score often. That game was never in doubt. And as I mentioned earlier, South Carolina beats Kentucky 24-7 there. So Kentucky not being able to get much done under Sawyer Smith. He's injured a bit, was injured in that Mississippi State game, but not necessarily, not the team we thought they were after the Florida game. Will, anything catch your eye around the SEC yesterday?
Mississippi State's dog got trampled on.
Oh yeah, yeah, I saw that.
That was unfortunate.
I'm waiting for Peter to come out about that.
I'm sure it has. But yeah, I mean, that was kind of like I think we talked about the Auburn game a little bit last week, and I kind of expected sort of a blowout just because I just didn't really feel that confident in Florida. Mississippi State's defense is just not the same as it was last year. So that was a big thing for me.
All right, and then when FSU looking a little bit better, beat NC State 31-13. So two wins in a row there for the Seminoles as they look to turn around their season and get better. Well, of course, the announcement was late Saturday night, but ESPN's College Game Day will be in Gainesville for the first time since 2012 for the matchup for Florida and Auburn. It will mark the 40th time Game Day that Florida has appeared on Game Day. That's the third highest total in the country. This morning, Sunday morning, as we record this, around 8 a.m., Florida released. We kind of saw this coming there with all the hints and everything, but throwback jerseys for the homecoming game versus Auburn as well. So, a lot of hype surrounding this Florida-Auburn matchup, a top 10 matchup. Game Day is going to be in town, special uniforms, homecoming, everything. Florida's pulling out all the stops for this one.
And it's the CBS game too, right?
That's right. Yeah, it is the CBS 3:30 game. Yep.
Everything, and it's everything it should be too. I mean, this is big. This has playoff implications. So sure. I mean, both teams. A statement is to be had one way or the other.
Absolutely. So Gainesville will be rocking all week for homecoming, of course, and then Saturday will be get there early because it will be kind of a crazy atmosphere as Game Day returns to Gainesville for the first time since 2012. Will, what you got coming up on the Athletic in the next few days?
Well, I'll definitely be focusing on just how Florida can actually win this game against Auburn. I feel like that will probably take up a good portion of my time this week, and just looking at that matchup and trying to focus on what to sort of expect on Saturday. I feel like it's almost a make or break for Florida's season as far as what their aspirations are. So definitely that would be a strong focus at the Athletic. Plus, I mean, we also offer a bunch of national stories as well in college football. Last week, we did a series on college football and food with the spread. So that, of course, had me work on a story on Shannon Schnell, the former offensive lineman from Florida, who is now an ambassador for Sonny's Barbecue. So I was happy with that one. That was a fun one to do. So I'm sure we got a bunch of other fun stuff coming up on the works at theathletic.com.
Absolutely. Catch Will and his work there. And Will, I mean, I kind of was kidding about it before we come on, but not much analysis is needed for Florida Auburn because I've already been told by a lot of the Florida fan base Florida's going to lose because they're wearing white helmets. So
I can just call it a week then.
yeah, us both. It'd be easy prep week this week. We don't have to worry about it.
I saw as much as I need to see versus Towson.
All right. That'll do it for this episode. That's Will Sammon. You can find his work at The Athletic and on Twitter at Will Sammon. I'm the host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SCC. Florida beats Towson 38-0. Guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.